Good evening. Hello, Rosemary.
Are you ready?
For those of you who don't have a seat, Rosemary was in charge of packing you in, so she's obviously done a really bad job. Anyway, welcome, Megan. It's great to have you here. And you can't sit there, that's my seat. Looks like I've lost my seat. Rosemary. When I gave Megan a seat before, she said, "Are you commenting on my height?" So, every single person in this room knows how the earthquake has impacted so significantly on all of our lives, and on lives of people who, as John Patterson has pointed out to us many times, have died, and their lives were misery right up to when they died. And I just want to start tonight by congratulating you, Megan. Yesterday, Peter Beck and myself and John and a number of people are on an advisory panel to Dame Sylvia Cartwright. And the way she's going about the EQC inquiry is just magnificent. So she was a great choice, and it's that sort of thing that helps Lancer Boyle, you know. And so, but I, having been in elected office, I know when you get there, you suddenly realise how awful things are, and it's not quite as simple as it was before you got there. It's great that you're here, Megan, and the council's gone through the deliberating process of the global settlement. A number of us here participated in that exercise in the last week, and the function of the Tuesday Club, actually I have to tell you its genesis was originally we thought, fuck you, Jerry Brownlee. but we've got past that. But we've got past that point. We're much more mature. Fuck you, Megan Woods. Yeah, that's right. So now it's not Jerry Brownlee. It's really important. Like Bruce White and I were talking. Bruce has written some really good stuff on the complications of decisions when you're in a hot seat, and how it's really important to have groups that you can play with ideas with, and that those groups will actually help you get a better answer. And that's what the Tuesday Club's about. It's about debating. We shout and holler at each other and then go and have a beer afterwards. And that's the importance of it. So, welcome. Thank you for coming. It was absolutely great to have you here. Your predecessor never darkened the door once. and over to you. And do you want your chair or not?
No. Thank you. He does have to lower the microphone. Thank you very much, Gary. I did ask if it was a comment on my height. Either that or kind of, I've got this insane urge to launch my career as a stand-up comedian. So you might be my test audience. Either that or with the chair a bit of acoustic singer-songwriter kind of stuff, which believe me would be bad. But look, this is my second time as minister with this group, and it's great to be able to be here to have this chat. I think it's probably, I don't know, it's not 2 years. It might be nearly 2 years since I was last here. No, it'll be a year and a bit since I was last here. And I just want to start off by acknowledging that things in our city have changed a lot even since then. I think that March 15 has been a reminder about how we have to absolutely value our connectedness as a community and as a city, and the fact that we all of us have a responsibility to make sure we're building the kind of inclusive society that we all want to live in, and that's a daily task. So I think that's something that has radically altered Christchurch in the time that I've been here. It's a hell of a thing that we've been through. We're the only city in New Zealand that has been through it, and I think it will have flow-on effects for a long time to come. Something else that has changed in the last year, which is a bit more positive, sorry to start off on such a negative note, actually in the last few weeks I've been joined by an Associate Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration and Putu Williams. And it's great to have her to work with. It's great to have another Christchurch Minister. And it's really good to have her, that she's taken responsibility for the cathedral. Thank you, Footy. See, I told you stand up is going to be my thing. Yeah, the Anglican Cathedral. Church and state, people. Church and state. So the rebuild of the Anglican Cathedral. She's also, once we, presuming, not that I would ever presume a cabinet process, but presuming we get the global settlement through, that she'll take responsibility around the residential red zone and working with groups as we transition very much to what the local leadership around that land looks like. So it's going to be great. So there'll be another minister you'll be able to get along, Gary, to have a bit of a chat, which I think will be really good. But when I came and spoke to you a year or so ago, I talked to you about the 4 questions that I asked myself on any question that I set out around Christchurch. And I think that it is really important as a decision maker when you're in the hot seat to have a set of principles and values that drive you, and that's something that I hold very dearly to in my political career. And the first question I set myself when making any decision about Christchurch is, first and foremost, how will this impact on people? Because I think that is the thing that we have to put to the forefront. And the evidence that that has been at the fore of our government's thinking, and my thinking as a minister, is in some of the programs we've rolled out. There are all things in our manifesto which I'm happy to say that we have ticked just about all of them off in year 2 of government. And one that I am especially proud of that we've set up, and just hearing how well it's going, is Mana Ake, which is the additional $28 million of mental health support we put into our primary schools. And that very much came from our experience as a group of Christchurch MPs in opposition, hearing consistently from parents and from teachers and from principals the kinds of troubles a lot of our young people were having that were out of kilter with the rest of the country in terms of developmental delays, in terms of how school ready they were arriving, in terms of toilet readiness. And I was actually talking to someone today that I was visiting she's just got into a new social housing unit, and one of the things that she's most looking forward to doing is actually toilet training her 3-year-old. Because when you're couch surfing, I imagine it's pretty hard to embark on the journey of toilet training your kids. And it's the same for people whose lives have been a bit broken by what we've been through in the last 10 years. So we're determined that we're not going to have Generation Quake, the kids that weren't even necessarily born at the time that the earthquakes happened, but really have borne a lot of the stress and the anxiety that's existed in our community since then. The other thing that I put into the people basket is actually the work that we've done around insurance. Because for me, actually settling insurance claims isn't just a fiscal transaction. That's about returning hope to people's lives. It's not just about the physical asset of your home, it's about security and it's about hope. And I said, and I maintain it still, that we cannot call our recovery or our regeneration, or whatever our word you want to use, a success until we do have settled insurance claims. So things like the inquiry with Dame Sylvia, I think that was an absolute priority for us to get the inquiry underway, but to find someone with the mana of Dame Sylvia. And I think, Dame Sylvia's been trusted into examining the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot in terms of the Cambodian inquiries. I think that we couldn't have found a better person than Dame Sylvia to look into what happened. And I know that she's conducting the inquiry in a very fair and very respectful of what people have been through manner. And I'm really grateful for her for that. The other thing that we've ticked off the list is, of course, the Insurance Tribunal. That's up and running. That one of the things that we also observed very keenly as opposition MPs was there was a real issue around access to justice for people. That there were a lot of people that actually finding a way to settle their claim was actually outside of their means in terms of their ability to pay a lawyer. And to get that done. So that's been vitally important, as was something that wasn't in our manifesto but became really obvious to me we needed it, was the GCCRS, the Greater Christchurch Claims Resolution Service, or as I described it to the officials when I said I wanted something done, the Department of Getting Your House Fixed. That it needed to be a single door that someone could walk through, and that they could say, I don't care if this is EQC or my private insurer, I just need someone to look at why my house isn't fixed yet and to find a way through to resolve it. So that is something else that I think is vitally important that we keep the foot on that pedal as well. The other question, so how will it impact our people? The second question I ask myself is how will this impact on momentum that we're seeing around the city? I think I, like everyone in this room, kind of felt like we'd come to a bit of a standstill. We seemed to be treading water. We weren't seeing the good things happening in our city at the rate we wanted to see them, and we wanted to ensure that actually we could see that hope for our own futures and the fact there was going to be a great city that was going to emerge from what we have all collectively been through. And the Crown's role in that is very much was around getting some momentum back into some of the stalled anchor projects. So that was about resetting the relationship with council and finding a constructive way to work through the Metro Sports, and just drove past it on the way here. There seems to be a lot of activity on that site, so that's fantastic to see that going, because there's a generation of kids that have grown up in Christchurch with no sports facilities. I mean, I think we all took, I was born in 1973, so QE2 had always been there for me. I think, what was it, the 74 games that it was there for, so it was something that had always been there in my lifetime. So making sure we're having those facilities back, and I've talked to a lot of parents who say, look, my kid is a really talented swimmer, or insert name of other sport, but there's just not the facilities in Christchurch for them to be able to enter competitions, or for them to be able to kind of train in the way they need to. So I think that is going to be a really important part of our journey as well. The other is actually finding a way through on the stadium. And that is something that we're continuing to work with council around, because that is something that has always been a complicated project, but I'm confident that we're on the right track. The other is about value. And I mean, we're all taxpayers and we're all ratepayers. And I think that's something that we can never lose sight of. That we not only pay our rates, therefore we want to ensure that we're building things that are value for the city, and by value I mean that we're not creating things that are going to be so expensive to run that we're going to saddle ratepayers with them forever. So that's something we have to take into account when we're thinking about how much we're going to spend on initial builds, because you can build something cheap with the view that you're going to have to keep repairing it and keep paying the maintenance on it, and that will fall on ratepayers. So I'm very cognizant of that as a fact. But value isn't just about economics. I mean, we've demonstrated as a government that we see well-being as a much broader term, and our budget showed that this is also about our environmental well-being, our cultural well-being, our social well-being, that all these domains, as they're called sometimes by the officials, need to come into play. And that's when value really comes to the fore, when we can demonstrate that those four things are being demonstrated. And that's where things like addressing things like mental health is critically important in terms of what we're doing. And mental health was one of our biggest investments, was I think the largest single investment in mental health that we've ever seen. And I think we know very keenly in Christchurch how important that investment is going to be to making sure that we can maximise the potential of the city that we all want to be, because we need our people to be well. But the last question, and it's not by any means fourth, because I think it's the least important, is what does it mean for our future? That we've all been through so much, and we want to know that actually we're building a city that is going to be here, and decisions that we've made are going to be here in 100 years, and people think, well, that was a good thing. We all grew up and lived in a city that someone, in terms of the colonial city that was built with some people with some vision about the kind of world they wanted to create. And we've got that opportunity to do that, and not many people get to do that in cities. This is quite a remarkable opportunity that we have here, thinking about how it is that we use the residential red zone. Though I won't be taking questions on that, because I'm still making the statutory decision. But it's kind of, they're the kinds of things that we need to think very much about, that kind of future. Someone had the foresight to put Hagley Park where it is, and to make that decision for our city. What are the legacy and the future projects that we're leaving for future generations, not just our kids or our grandkids, but generations on, that are going to be really appreciated. So look, I'm not going to say a lot more, because I suspect there's going to be a whole lot of questions, and I'd rather us have a conversation than me talk at you. So happy to take questions, but pass me my beer, Gary.
Oh. I've been drinking it. I did say early on, I didn't realise the dissenters normally sat in the front row.
evening, Megan. I'm Angela, and I went to the City Council meeting last Thursday when they talked about the global settlement. And one of the things that people were saying was how good it was to get back control of Christchurch. And so my question to you is, why is the government still here, and how long are they here for?
So the legislation as it stands under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act has the government presence under the Greater Christchurch umbrella to 2021. Now, I've been on record saying that I have a bit of a kamikaze mission here. I want to be the last minister. I think we can do that sooner. And that we have actually been charting a pathway towards that all the way through. So things like returning the district plan ahead of where we needed to. I didn't think there was a case, was it 2018 or 2019? I think it was 2018 that we signed the district plan back for the central government to be making decisions about a local authority's district plan. I didn't think that there was a case for that to be happening. So that was returned to the city. But so I would like to think by the next election, one of the things that we're really putting collective effort into with the City Council is making sure we're charting out a very clear transition plan. One of the things I've observed in Christchurch over the last 10 years is we've arrived at what I call a whole lot of Christchurch cliffs that we haven't planned for the end of things. Things have just abruptly stopped, and we haven't planned for what comes next. So one of the things that we're working really collaboratively with council around is what that pathway to local leadership looks like. But I will make one point. You don't want the government to completely get out. The government doesn't get out of anywhere. It's the government that provides your schools, your hospitals.
Oh, I'm not talking about that.
No, exactly. But I'm talking about Christchurch taking its role as the second largest city in New Zealand again. That Christchurch assuming its conversations with government based on the fact it is the largest city in the South Island, that it is a powerhouse in that way, and it is a more normalised relationship. We do all have to acknowledge, though, that the world has moved on since 2010 when all this started. When by the time that happens, it will be a decade on. There are new challenges that the globe is facing. Climate change wasn't anywhere near up the agenda that any city was facing, that it is a decade on. So we're not going to return to exactly the way things were in 2010, but what we have to get back to is a relationship where Christchurch has the same kind of relationship with central government that Auckland has, that Wellington has, that our major cities have, because that's what we are. We're a flourishing, vibrant city that has a lot to offer the nation, and that's the way I want us to be having conversations with central government.
Ross.
Hi, Minister. My name's Ross Milne. I used to work for Sarah, and my question has one of my questions has been answered, and I wanted to comment about the fact that I witnessed during those days the impact or the negative impact of the Wellington bureaucracy and the political interference in the processes. And so my first question was, and I think it's been answered, was why are Otakaro and DPMC still in town? And for the second one is, what is your, since we need more Christchurch into the regeneration, what's your commitment to establishing one authority to do to manage and plan the work that needs to be done?
Sure, and good question. So there's really simple question, the answer to why are DPMC still in town is while you still have a minister, they need officials. That's the very, very simple answer. But look, one of the things that I think we do have to acknowledge, we all have our own views around the history of Sarah, and I have some very deeply held views myself of that, which will come as no surprise to you on that. But we have had added capacity in our city for a decade that we actually do have to be planning for how it eases out. One of the things that we do a proactive release of our diaries as ministers, that Leanne has the most access of any mayor in the country to ministers. And that largely is because there's a central government agency that coordinates all Christchurch's wishes. She has more access than Mayor Goff, who is mayor of a city of more than 1 million people. So we do need to think that actually there has been, in terms of the relationship that can be formed between the city and central government, that is an important relationship. And part of the transition planning is, how do we not just abandon everything that we've built up in terms of the ability to work together across central and local government. I'm not going to talk about the political interference of my predecessors. That's for you to judge on that, and I'm not going to defend it. I can tell you that that I came in with an absolute determination for us to reset relationships. I think it was one of the things that had to be done in Christchurch, and to make sure that we could work constructively with City Council, because it was the only way that we could get the best for Christchurch. In terms of one central agency will regenerate, that we know that that's a legislated time limit on that. We've already seen that the flip happen in terms of the appointment of the chair. That's now in the ambit of the City Council. That's not something that central government has any say in, and I think that's a totally appropriate way of doing things. That it is about that pathway through to local leadership, and Leanne and the council chose to appoint Teray, so bringing together Christchurch NZ and Regenerate having the same chair, I think shows that there is that kind of melding together on things. In terms of Ōtākaro, Ōtākaro's still got some jobs to do. The one guarantee I will give you, we're not going to bail before the job is done. That there's still some building that has to be done, and I don't think anyone wants the people that are in charge of the things like the MSF to hightail it out of town and leave a half-built project. So that is what needs to be done. But we do have to have the conversation once we get Kāinga Ora and set up, which is the Urban Development Authority, and we are looking at National Urban Development Authorities and how that is localised in Christchurch, and that will be a conversation we have within a national context, not a bespoke Christchurch context. And I think we're all looking forward to that day. This is about how it is that Christchurch goes back to being the second largest city in New Zealand, the capital of the South Island and the largest city, and has that conversation in the same way Auckland will have that conversation and Wellington will have that conversation.
Hands up.
Hello.
I love the way you talked about the end of the cliff and planning for the longer term, that sort of stuff. And from a tertiary point of view, we're really appreciative of how much money the government has put into supporting the tertiary sector since the earthquakes. Just interested from a Christchurch longer term point of view, NZIST, the Polytechnic merged to 16 institutions, brought into one. Do you see a big chance for us to have something from a longer term point of view, a government agency in Christchurch beyond the transition board?
Yeah, well, I can't make that commitment, sorry, but look, we do have...
Is it something you can push for as a...
Yeah, and look, I think that's something that Christchurch can push for too, that we've got the opportunity that the establishment agency is going to be here. That is something that we can push for. But look, that Polytech reform is, I think, a really positive thing and is central to what we need to achieve as a government. That when we came into government, we were faced cabinet after cabinet of Polytechs on the brink of basically being insolvent. And for us, skills training and the ability for people to acquire skills is absolutely central to what we need to do. The Polytech sector collectively is probably about the size of Auckland University. So actually collectively it becomes a really important and big player within our tertiary sector. That we've and I'm very mindful of, so we've got some houses to build. We need to be training some people with the skills to do it, and our Polytechs are going to be absolutely critical around that. We were not going to leave patches of our country without having access to quality education post-secondary school.
Minister Cam Preston here. Just wanted to ask how much you feel that the Crown has expended dollar-wise in Canterbury as a result of the earthquakes.
Heaps.
Could I ask you to give me a dollar amount to the nearest billion?
Oh look, there's a figure that's often, it's 14 billion I think is the figure that's often used, and that often that obviously encompasses a whole range of things. I think one of the most important things that we see within that, some of that is EQC spend, and that, as I sketched out in my opening remarks, is an incredibly important spend. That we're obviously into the Crown Guarantee around that now, so that's not all the natural disaster fund, that's being expended. I think it's 125 million that we've done under the Crown Guarantee now. And I expect that to grow, given that we've already spent $430 million on botched repairs. And as taxpayers, know that that is money that we're not spending on schools and hospitals and other things that governments would like to provide.
I think the impression that the rest of New Zealand is getting, though, is that that's $15 billion of expenditure in Canterbury. I don't think they quite realise that 10 billion of that, or 2/3 of that, really is with regard to EQC and other insurers that failed as a result of the earthquake. And I think that there is a, especially with the global settlement, there's
sorry, Cam, some interviews I've done with John Campbell, I think it's been pretty clear the amount that the taxpayers picking up in regards to EQC.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that at all, but what I'm saying is when we come to settle the global settlement, I think the impression has been given that the Crown has been more than generous in the money that it's paying to the people of Canterbury, but really, 10 billion of that 15 billion really was saved by previous generations of New Zealanders or people that paid insurance policies, and it's really a failure of that sector. And I just feel that the opportunity cost of that $10 billion, where it could have been spent elsewhere in the recovery of Canterbury, you just imagine what we could have done with an extra $10 billion.
Yeah, but we couldn't have taken $10 billion out of the Natural Disaster Fund and spent it on anything but EQC. That's what the account was set up for. But I think the important thing to realise is that we are now into the Crown Guarantee, so you are paying for that as taxpayers, as are taxpayers around the country. And we won't walk away from that. In fact, that we've made it more possible for people to identify their botched repairs. And I know there's people in the room that are part of some of the claimant reference groups that are around actually making sure that people have access to that. The job isn't finished. But look, I think there's another really important number, and that there's still $3 billion of Crown expenditure to go in Christchurch. That is the amount of the entire Provincial Growth Fund. So in terms of what's being spread around the country, the rest of the regions. So I think we need to think about the impact that expenditure can have. We still have the MSF will be built, that there's a huge amount of local contractors that will benefit out of that. I think it's 86% of the money will actually flow through to local businesses through the contract. We'll have the stadium. There'll be a huge stimulatory impact of that, because my expectation in the procurement rules that this government is setting up is actually we do need to consider how locals are benefiting when the government spends money. So look, not denying that we need to be really wary of rest of New Zealand wariness about Christchurch, and that is something that we always have to be wary of. But I think the point remains is that we still have opportunities for further stimulatory impacts on our economy. I mean, Christchurch actually didn't bear the brunt of the dairy downturn in the way that some other cities, and Christchurch might have otherwise, because of the stimulation that was coming through construction. But what we also have to make sure is that when all the cranes go away, that we've actually built a resilient economy that underlies that. And that's something that I'm really passionate about as the Minister for Research, Science and Innovation. And I'm really, really, really pleased to see my officials are working really closely with Christchurch NZ, and that we've got some exciting opportunities happening in that space here in Christchurch as well.
John.
This might sound funny coming from somebody my age, but I'm worried about the future. Well,
I'm worried about your past.
Your future looks bright. Your future looks bright.
Yeah, that's it. You should be worried about your past. Yeah.
It's not confession, John.
No, what are we doing about planning for the future, for the next quake? What happened, none of us was ready for it.
Yeah.
But we've learned a hell of a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are we doing about planning for the next one? I mean, two things I do know: I'm going to die, and there's going to be another earthquake somewhere.
Yeah.
And we've got to learn from that. I would hate to think we've gone all through this the way we've gone through, and future generations isn't going to benefit from what we've learned.
Yeah.
So what do we do now and then?
So I think, John, you've just taken that kind of old quip about the two things you can be sure of is death and taxes, and put a Christchurch spin on it. Death and earthquakes, two things we can be sure of. But you're absolutely right. And actually one of Gary's opening remarks spoke to what we're doing to planning for the future. And you were obviously talking to Dame Sylvia, is actually around how it is that we can make sure that our Earthquake Commission is well set for the future. That's one thing we're doing. The other thing that we are doing through the civil defence portfolio, that it was Minister Whāpoi and now it's Minister Hanare, actually looking at what we need to be doing to make sure that we're prepared for the immediate aftermath. But I think that we have in Christchurch the opportunity to make sure that we take our collective wisdom of what's gone wrong and what's gone right in terms of what a recovery and a regeneration looks like. And one of the things that I was determined to make sure happened, and it did, was that we had the symposium where people did actually get to share some of their learning from it. I think one of the things that we absolutely have to be prepared for after another big event is actually the mental health impacts that it has on a population and how long term and the cycle that they go through. It's not linear. I think one of the things that we were able to see actually after the mosque attacks is that we had leaders in this city that understood the kind of wave of anxiety and mental health impacts that may come from that. And I think we were prepared in a city like perhaps no other place in New Zealand may have been to deal with that horrific event on March 15 because of what we'd been through. We knew how to rally and we kind of had some expectation of what was coming down the line. But that is also one of the jobs. So when people say, when are DPMC getting out of town, that actually DPMC are the repository of a lot of that knowledge of what's gone right and what's gone wrong, and making sure that we're feeding that through into central government to make sure that that understanding is across agencies. So yes, it is something we're thinking about a lot because we can't have gone through this for nothing.
Megan, you've mentioned rates and taxes a couple of times. I'd just like to say now at the risk of being hounded out of this room, I love taxes and rates and want to pay more of both.
I'll tell Leanne tomorrow.
Tell Leanne
He's got
that,
no money.
and you can tell everybody in your government that. Yeah, and you also refer, as many people do, the burden for future generations in tax, the burden of tax. I think if tax is done properly and rates, it's an investment that yields returns. I don't see it as a burden if it's done sensibly and if it's explained to people the reason behind the rates and the taxes. And the stadium is one of those things. I wonder why we're investing in the stadium, and I know it's local government as well and not just your responsibility, but central and local government together. We've got a rugby stadium here now that is really full. Really full. It's even for big games of the Crusaders, really full. We've got a beautiful cricket ground and we've got lovely other facilities being built for other sports and things like this. We've got the Horncastle Arena where concerts can, I know it's not the best, but they can be there for a few years yet. So I just see building a stadium a bit like, buying a new television big screen for our house when the roof's leaking. Let's just park it for a while, Is that possible? And can we explain to us ratepayers and taxpayers a bit more about the investment aspect, not the burden aspect?
Yeah. No, and what I was referring to, Patrick, and I don't know if it was clear, was actually what we can't do is burden ratepayers by doing something, by cutting corners and investing less, knowing that actually all we're setting ourselves up for ongoing operational expenditure. Because we've built something that requires constant maintenance. Now, the Gary will probably be able to explain this in far more detail, but the multiplier effect on rates increases is quite different between capital expenditure and operational expenditure, and I think we have to be mindful of that we're not actually just setting ourselves up for some, the easiest things for us would be to do is cut a cheque and say build what you like, and not have any kind of concern about that. But I'm a ratepayer in Christchurch too, so I do. In terms of the why are we building a stadium, well, that was very much around the Capital Accelerator Fund. That I think that was a decision for the city to make. in terms of the phasing and the apportionment out of that $300 million that we put in as a new government around where that was going to bring forward. Now, I'm aware there are a range of opinions across the city around the stadium. There's some people that think that it has to be built tomorrow, and there are people that don't want it built at all. But I think one of the things that we do have to know, that we say that we've got a venue for concerts that's serving us all right, it's not. We're not getting the acts to Christchurch, we're getting charity concerts. Springsteen only came here because he felt bad for us and because the mayor asked. We're the second largest city in the country. We are the largest city in the South Island. That actually these do have, if we want to have, you know, our inner city flourishing, that we want to have events that are bringing people in, that it's really hard out there for a lot of our hospitality operators. Obviously Smash Palace excluded on a Tuesday night, but it's kind of like it is really struggling, that actually that they're a very loud voice saying that actually we need some stuff happening in the central city that's going to bring people in and make things work in terms of a central city. But I'm aware there's a range of opinions. I don't think it's tenable that Christchurch doesn't have a stadium that is going to last. One of the things when you say we've got a stadium that's serving us all right at the moment, the cost of maintaining that temporary stadium just grows and grows and grows. Now that's council obviously that are footing the bill for that. But that was built to last, I don't know, what was it? 2 or 3 years, and we're into a decade nearly of it. So the operational expenditure to keep it afloat is actually just, you know, so if you're going to use the analogy of buying the big screen TV when the roof's leaking, it's about getting up there with a bit of sellotape, but when you can't afford the sellotape to put it on, knowing that actually it's not going to hold. So that
the Neaton Stadium's a white element, and it's not paying its way. And I would suspect the same is going to happen here.
Yeah, and look, one of the things, and I mean, it is a debate, and I know that, but one of the things is actually the wider economic development case that goes around it, that the return isn't always directly to the person operating the stadium. That when you have those big events in a city, the number of people that travel to it, they stay in hotels, they go out for dinner, they go to bars, they all do all those kind of things. And the fact that if we are going to assume our rightful place as the second largest city, I personally think we need to be able to host international events.
The worrying thing, Megan, is he's a rugby nut.
Thanks, Minister. Patrick Fontaine. Our company, and it's welcome you to the Innovation Precinct. Our company has developed these 5 buildings that you see out the window here. Mm-hmm. So that's facilitated $150 million of investment into the city here. And we worked really closely with Vodafone, and that helped get Vodafone to the Innovation Precinct as well as Kathmandu. And so as looking forward now, right, you've got the dual role of being the Minister for Christchurch as well as the Minister for Science and Innovation. And then I look at Christchurch is the only city in New Zealand doesn't have a university in the city centre. And I look at all the other major city centres that have such major benefit from having tertiary education, really closely tied with business. How are you going to address the opportunities of tying the business sector to tertiary within this whole innovation precinct and the opportunities that Christchurch has, really unique opportunities of getting this massive employment back into the city, because that's what we're lacking. We're just lacking people.
Hot desk in the stadium. Yeah. Use the stadium site for the university.
Yeah. You know, we may have separation of church and state that I mentioned earlier on. We also have the autonomy of the universities that I'd also like to point out. But look, you know, I grew up in Christchurch. I think my entire lifetime, the only campus I can remember is Ilam, and the conversation about whether or not to move the university back into the central city has been one that's been going on. And I think that there are many vice-chancellors that have tried various aspects of it. And chancellors, yes.
The chancellor's over here.
I know, I can see the chancellor. I was looking at her during the question. But my eyesight's not quite that bad yet, Gary. Yeah. Look, I think one of the most important things is that When it comes to innovation in New Zealand, we are, as Sean Hendy has said, we are a city of 4 million people. We are geographically dispersed anyway. That we have expertise all around the country, and we need to think of ourselves as a big city when it comes to innovation and how it is we can connect the right people. And I think that that's really critical if we're going to get the kind of critical mass that we need around innovation. I think it's entirely possible to have really strong relationships, not only with the university, even though you are geographically dispersed, that there just needs to be good transport links between it, but also it is just over the road from another important tertiary institution, and that is ARA, which also needs to be seen as a big employer and a big driver of innovation as well. I'll also take this opportunity to advertise the $1 billion we invested in R&D tax incentives. That one of the things that we know that we have to be working alongside businesses large and small to invest in R&D. We are right at the bottom of the OECD in how much we invest in R&D, and I think that is one of the most critical elements, that we get our companies more engaged with innovation. And what you've done here is amazing. I have been in these buildings and talked to some of the people doing absolutely amazing things, and I saw one of the people that work in that building at the KiwiNet Awards the other night with their product, and that was fantastic to see someone from home around that in terms of innovation awards. So we have to make sure that we're incentivising and bringing people together, but that's not necessarily around the big investments about bringing the university into the city. The university's just invested a huge amount of money in buildings at Ilam, which I'm sure that it's quite keen to get some use out of, because there's some stunning facilities on campus there, but that doesn't mean there can't be elements that are in the city, and I think that that's probably critical.
Should we ask Sue to comment?
Yes, Sue, do you want to comment?
No, I'm happy to.
Sue.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sue McCormack, Chancellor of the University of Canterbury. I think the importance is not necessarily the distance apart, it's just the connection.
Yeah.
And I think we have been a bit alienated, like we all have in our jobs and our businesses and all sorts of things. We've all kind of been dispersed throughout the city and having to shift. I mean, I had a law firm in Christchurch, and we ended up in Benham Road, and so we've all kind of had this dispersion going on. And I think that now, with our new Vice Chancellor and myself, we're really working really well with businesses, and we're wanting to connect, so I'm sure that we'll come and see you. But I think it's the connection and the relationship and the energy rather than the place. And we've been through, where do we want to be. I actually did my first degree in the CBD and I loved it, and I did my second degree out at Ilam. But it is where it is, and if you talk about Patrick talking about expenses and extra costs, the cost of shifting it back in is never going to be sustainable, so that's never going to happen. So it's just about connecting. We don't want to be an ivory tower with just academics and students alienated, because this is our city. We should be the anchor, and we need to work on that, and we are working on that.
Yeah, and look, I'm going to do another week ad, the R&D tax incentives there. That one of the things is we've drastically lowered the threshold of how much a company has to spend in order to be eligible compared to a growth grant through Callaghan. But there is no threshold if you're working with an accredited provider. So we're really incentivising those connections with our CRIs and our universities to make sure we're connecting businesses and our tertiary education researchers together, because there is so much value for us as a country when we bring them together.
Thank you very much for that reply. Just a couple of quick closing comments. So if the business sector works together with the public sector, it is all possible around here, right? Within the Innovation Precinct. We're working really hard on the other building that you see right out the window here, the IRD building, and we've got a proposal there where it's not going to cost the public sector much, if anything, but we have to work together, and that's the biggest issue that I think the business sector has in Christchurch, is we have to work together and look at finding commercial mechanisms by which we both benefit, and that's the biggest plea I've got for Christchurch.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things, if we're going to take some positives about what we've learned over the last 10 years, whether that be at a very personal level with our neighbours, whether that be kind of groups having to come together to work in different ways, that connectedness, I think, needs to be one of the big legacies for us as a city that we take out of what we've been through.
Kia ora, Megan, Evan here.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. When you were here last time, shortly afterwards, you granted 5-year, or the potential for 5-year leases for transitional temporary use.
A win for the Tuesday Club.
Sorry, yes, yeah, I know. And although it was a win for the Tuesday Club, there was a little get-out clause that Lynn's introduced there that has actually meant that very little transitional use has actually happened on the ground since. And that is originally a 30-day get-out clause for the Crown, saying that at any point the Crown could give 30 days notice to vacate. That's now, you've extended that to 90 days with the potential to go to 180 days. But that hasn't unlocked the logjam of things in the pipeline that the community wants to do that would massively improve community wellbeing in the east. With the global settlement now progressing very well and other things in the pipeline, is there any chance that that condition can be relaxed? Because our funders simply won't fund or invest in temporary transitional use unless they have security of tenure for the full 5 years.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is a conversation that we've had, and as you said, we did move to go to those 5-year leases, and we have changed those 30-day cancellation clauses to 90 to 3 months in recognition that they probably belong to a time when it was more about CBD rather than out in the residential red zone and what that was around. And the balance that we always have to get there is managing expectations around transitional use. As this is transitional use, that what we can't do is have people putting down de facto property rights, because actually there's collective community decisions that have to be made about the use of that land. So that is always a balance, because they are just that. In terms of major capital expenditure going in, that is something that we do have some concern around, because one of the things that I think I've learned in politics is that temporary very, very quickly becomes permanent in people's heads.
It might not be a bad thing.
No, it might not, but there actually has to be a decision-making process around it, and that there has to be a fair way of making those decisions, and not just de facto property rights being put down. Because I mean, I absolutely get you're talking about community use, but we could have commercial operators that could argue on the same terms.
It's only 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so, but it is that balance. But look, I think the thing that you can take, Evan, and this is now, once we get through global settlement, assuming we do, that this will be Minister Williams' problem, along with the cathedral, the Anglican cathedral. But I think what we've shown in the 2 years we've been in government, we've been really willing to work with the community to try and move these to be more workable. We've extended the period of the lease. We've extended the notice day period, so I think it's just keeping those connections. And one of the things I've valued is actually the fact that we have actually had regular catch-ups, that we have been able to talk these things through, and that we have had a dialogue. So I think it's just keep on doing what you're doing, because you are making a difference.
Kia ora. Colin Merck, the Bank of the Bus Trilogy over here.
Now I don't have my glasses on, I can't.
Thank you, Minister, for your eloquent account of what you and the government are doing for the city. I'd like to hear the word ecology mentioned a few more times, particularly in relation to its support for an authentic, genuine ecotourism and national park city sort of status, that kind of thing. But my particular question and challenge is very specific in relation to your mention of the polytechnics. And as you pointed out, we're possibly transitioning to having, you know, a big global polytechnic organisation. And the question for me and you is, where is that central office going to be? Now, one of the things that will make the city big and great and second and so on will be when there are major sort of government head offices in the South Island, and particularly in Christchurch. So I think this is an opportunity where the government can actually step in with a decision and put the head office of the Polytechnic, of the big generic Polytechnic, either here or even in Invercargill for that matter, you know, somewhere in the South Island. No, honestly, we know in a sense it doesn't matter, but the important thing is that there has to be a critical mass of resources from central government, not just throwing money at us, but actually setting up career pathways and some sort of gravitas around the South Island, because so much has drifted to Auckland, the head office and so on, and your own CRI, as you know, amalgamated with the northern one and the head office went north. The only head office that I know of is my own Landcare Research in the South Island, and that's been on a bit of a knife edge as well. So I don't know what discussions have been going on about where that head office might be. I'm sure Auckland's trying to grab it, but I think this is an opportunity where the government can actually move that centre of gravity down here.
Well, I think that actually no decision, and I don't even think, and I'm not privy to that, but I don't even think the discussions on where the permanent head office will be. But I think we can all celebrate the fact the establishment office is here, that this is where it's going to be. So it hasn't been just we'll do it in Wellington because it's easier, it's close to the bureaucrats, that actually it has been about dispersal, and that we have actually demonstrated by action the fact that we are walking that walk in terms of that establishment body being based here in Christchurch, and I think that's a great thing for our city, and it's now our opportunity to prove to everybody that this should be the permanent home of it. Yeah. So, rise up!
Entry Land Rover.
And I was very pleased to turn aside the new Manaki Whenua building last Friday. I very much like to see the CRI headquarters down here.
Hi, I'm Claire and I'm a town planner. And it's basically as close as planning gets to ministers. It's Minister for the Environment, but you just happen to be the Minister of Regeneration, so, and for Christchurch, so you're my connection from planning into government, so thank you for being here. I have some real concerns about the future and planning of the city. There is still so much vacant land, so much vacant land. So my challenge for you is I need you to put pressure on private landowners to hurry up. You are the Minister of Regeneration, make them regenerate. And the thing that concerns me is that my children are going to grow up. I've got a 14-year-old and a 4-year-old, and the best thing that's happened is actually the bus interchange, because she loves buses.
Yeah.
The little one loves it.
Great cities have great public transport.
Yeah, we want more things, by the way. Some light rail would be quite nice. If you can pull some money out, that'd be great. But what concerns me more is that I've read the letter of expectations that you and Leanne wrote for Regen, which is basically reading between lines, looks like a thanks very much and can you wind up. What concerns me is, what do you think the next steps for regeneration is for the city in the next 5 to 10 years? Because look, tomorrow's a really big day for me as a planner. The National Policy Statement for Urban Development comes out, so as a geek I'm really excited about reading that. I'm watching what HLC is doing, and I'm looking forward to hearing something about an urban development authority that can help guide some of the, you talk about keeping your foot on the pedal for regeneration in the city, and what concerns me is I can't see that happening in my profession, because you've closed down the agency that I thought was going to do that for us. So what are you going to do to keep my spirits up about regeneration and planning in this city?
Gary, go and buy her another drink. There's a few things in there. In terms of the letter of expectations for regeneration, the thanks but wind up. I think one of the important things to understand is Regenerate Christchurch had a limited shelf life under the legislation, that it was never intended to be a permanent organisation. What the letter of expectations from Leanne and I shows is, let's not arrive at another one of those Christchurch cliffs. Let's be planning together to know what that pathway looks like, how we can connect all the different bits together that is going to be responsible for regeneration, because this isn't just a discrete thing, the regeneration of our city. It's a journey that's going to continue beyond the lifespan of somewhere like Regenerate. So it's like, let's plan for this together, let's make sure we've got all the component bits working together. But I think it's a really interesting question you ask, what am I going to do about it as the Minister? I do have some responsibility, but part of that responsibility is also making sure that we're returning to local leadership. Because actually in every other city, it's not central government that decides these things, it's local people. And I started my political career as a community board member, and I've always thought that decision making is close to communities and to people is one of the most important things that we can do. So that is one of the things that I'm doing, is making sure that through, you're a geek, you'll love this, the district plan, things like that, that's back in the hands of the people where it belongs, with locals making decisions about their own communities. So that's one of the most critical things that we need to do. We need to make sure that we're doing our bit around the anchor projects, that we're not letting those stall, that we know. I mean, someone asked about, Patrick, you asked about the investment case for the stadium. One of the big things about making a decision about the investment case was actually unlocking some hope for people around that area as well, so that the rest of the land that lies around that won't lay vacant, that people can see a future for that bit of the city. So we've got to make sure that we're not land banking and not just getting on, and not getting on with what needs to be done, so that other people can make commercial decisions around it. In terms of forcing developers, I don't think we're at that point. Some people do accuse our government of being quite heavy-handed, but we have no plans to nationalise the development community and force them to do things. But what we do have to do is get the settings right, and that's what we're working through, and that's where urban development authorities are really important. And one of the things that we know, if we're going to get the uptake of housing that we need in our country, Christchurch actually is in quite a different boat than some other parts of the country around volume of housing. Affordable housing is probably a different question, but volume of housing, we're in quite a different boat. So we do have to get those settings right. And you're quite right that the National Policy Statement tomorrow will be a big event, and it is important. But we have a responsibility as a government to the country to make sure that actually we're facilitating the ability for people to do to get on and do things in a way that is socially responsible and environmentally responsible, and Colin, ecologically responsible as well. So I'll throw that E word in again, so that we do have those responsibilities as well. But for me, it is about the return to local leadership.
Kia ora, Megan, Diana here. I'm really interested in following the references to future planning and the certainty of quakes, references to climate change and the vulnerability to natural disaster, to think about the vulnerability of our connections when we depend entirely on road and one tenuous little railroad going north, and the difficulties that we all experienced when the Kaikoura quake cut those lines. Now, I think it's really important to consider perhaps the possibility of coastal shipping.
Yes.
Labor used to have a good blue water policy. It had planning for that, or it certainly had a policy developed, I think up to the end of the Clark government, and it seemed to have disappeared altogether. I wonder if you could tell us what is being done to consider coastal shipping as a part of our lifelines from Christchurch.
Yeah, no, and it is really important, and it is something, and I'm pretty sure, I can correct myself if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that Minister Jones is doing some of this stuff in terms of the infrastructure portfolio. So coastal shipping is certainly something that we're thinking about. We know in order to meet our commitments in terms of carbon reduction, that actually we need to decarbonise a lot of our transport, and not only rail but coastal shipping is really important to that as well. So it certainly is on the agenda, it hasn't fallen off. But one of the things, and I didn't address the transport part of your question, and one of the things the Tuesday Club might want to get stuck into, that one of the things that we haven't ticked off in terms of the manifesto is actually some of the stuff around transport, and that's something that I'm really passionate about. I think that if we are actually going to be building cities in a country that is genuinely working towards a net zero carbon future by 2050, and one of the reasons I'm in politics is that we have to get public transport right. Now, we as a city haven't been as ambitious as some cities in our ask. And it's not just our city, it's the greater Christchurch. It's the collection of local authorities. That actually, I think that when we gear up for the next round of funding, that actually I think there needs to be a real community push behind real ambition. I want to see passenger rail. I'm the MP for Wigram. I sometimes describe myself as the MP for congestion. I have Brom Street, Lincoln Road, Blenheim Road, Riccarton Road, Main South Road, Yoldhurst Road in my electorate. And
so it's your fault.
It's Selwyn's fault. No, but we've seen the Normkirk City of the Future, Rolleston, come to life. And Colin, you work at Lincoln, and I used to work at Lincoln, and I was out there the other day. The development that's happened to the southwest of Christchurch as well as the north, I think means we need to be having that real future focus around what mass transit could look like for our greater Christchurch, not just Christchurch City.
Okay, two more.
Cheers, Megan. One thing I'm really excited about that's come up a lot tonight is infrastructure. And it's something that Barnaby Bennett spoke really well about when he was here a little while ago, and that he talked about at the Earthquake Symposium. And about a year and change ago, Anneke Goodall wrote a great piece in the press where he described how we had started rebuilding a 20th century city here in Christchurch. So what I'm really curious about is how are we, for the future of the rebuild, going to be building actually infrastructures that are going to do the really exciting stuff that is going to be in 100 years' time, that is going to repair our ecologies and is going to be exciting for us to experience, and it's going to make this city healthier and more prosperous, so that as these projects sort of come and go, how are we going to be leaving the land in Christchurch area better than when we walked onto it?
Look, I think the conversation that I just had about transport is really critical, that we know successful cities in the 21st century will have really effective transport systems that are carbon neutral. And I think we also need to change our thoughts around what infrastructure in the 21st century looks like as well. That one of the things that we can start thinking about is our opportunity around having carbon sequestration as part of our infrastructure here in Christchurch. That we have a lot of land, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around that for obvious reasons. But in terms of, is that a critical part of 21st century infrastructure? I think it is. In terms of how it is that we may be preparing for that. I think the other infrastructure that we absolutely have to think about is decentralised energy, and that's probably driven by the fact that I'm the Minister for Energy as well. But that we're working towards 100% renewable energy, and that digitisation and decentralisation are the absolutely critical pathways for energy in the 21st century. It is also the way that we know the levelised cost of electricity, the cheapest forms of generation we can build, solar and wind, going into the future, and how it is that we can actually be addressing some of the dual problems we have around poverty, in particularly energy poverty, with more decentralised energy systems as well.
Do you think, just curious, do you think the R&D fund that you mentioned earlier, is that a good avenue for those sorts of...
Yeah, it can be, but we also set up in the budget two other really important funds. One was one was 28, I think, $28 million for a new energy centre in Taranaki, which is, you may or may not have heard, we ended new exploration permits for oil and gas. But one of the things that I am absolutely determined is that we are making sure that there is a future for those workers and their community, and that we're setting up the jobs of the future there. And I think there's no reason why Taranaki can't continue to be an energy capital for New Zealand. It just will be a renewable energy centre for renewable rather than fossil fuels. So there's that fund. We also set up a contestable renewable energy fund as well within the science portfolio. So there are things that we're putting a lot of emphasis on because we know that we've got to be supporting the great ideas that are out there about how we can make this work in the New Zealand context.
Last question, Tom.
Oh, Minister, I don't think it's a question, it's more of a thank you for what you've done tonight. But one of the things I'd like to just challenge our gentleman over the back here that talked about the university coming into the city. And one of the reasons why I say that is, among the other things I've done beside community, is I ran an electronic company. 61% of our income came from overseas. Our building nearly fell over in the earthquake in the central city. The enormous effect and energy we got from our overseas clients was amazing. Even to the point that they took 2 of our staff members to the States for 19 weeks and looked after them. Now, one of the things that we did do with Canterbury University, and I think this is so important, our company spent a lot of time talking to the university and listening to their students and bringing their students into our company, sitting alongside them. And then we did dummy interviews before they left university.
Were
And the
you in
reason
charge of them?
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was the biggest dummy of the whole lot. But the thing about the dummy interviews was we got a chance to pick who we wanted. And also sometimes say to our overseas clients, this young man or this young woman, you want to look at them. And some of them did. They hired them out of Christchurch because of how good our university is. And I think we've got to remember, we're two, as I said last week, and I don't very often come 2 weeks in a row, it's usually 2 years in a row. We've got to start focusing on how good we are and how good we do things.
Yeah.
You know, and if we start doing that as a collective, this place will be humming. Not just this place, but the whole city.
We don't just need stadiums either.
No.
There it comes again, Megan.
Yep.
I don't think there was a reply to that one. I think Tom at the end was going to say, don't you? I think I was just standing back thinking about all the questions tonight, and it's just such a broad spectrum of interests here. And that's why we really appreciate you coming along. And some of us feel passionately about all sorts of most of us could keep you going all night on one topic. But it's really important that we continue this dialogue. And it's really important that I think that Tom's comments at the end were superb, because we've actually got to pick our chin up. We've actually got to say, bugger it, we are the second largest city in New Zealand. We are the capital of the South Island. And we're here, and we're going to actually, we're going to win again. And so I'd just like to everyone to thank you for coming along tonight, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
And you'll be able to capture her individually on the way out.
Very early flights.
I do need to take a beeline.